morning. Begin today with Sefer Yeshaya, the first part of the Shir. We are in Perek Tes Vav of Sefer Yeshaya. We're in the portion of Yeshaya where Yeshaya is prophesying about the fall of other nations and other kingdoms. In the previous program, we had Masa. Masa is a kind of prophecy, usually means a prophecy of the falling of a nation. Masa means a burden, but it's one of the words that's used for a Navi. And these program begin with the word Masa, a prophecy, a burden prophecy. So we've learned about the prophecy of the fall of Pleshes, the Philistines, not the Palestinians. There's no nation Palestinian. The Philistines. We learned about the Masa on Bavel, the prophecy of the fall of Bavel. Bavel has not arisen yet to be a world dominant power at this moment. This is a prophecy. Not only is Yeshaya and the other Nevi'im prophesizing about the rise of Bavel, they're already prophesying about the fall of Bavel. In Perek Tes Vav on page 122 of the Art Scroll, we are now up to Masa Moab, the prophecy concerning Moab, the downfall of Moab. Ammon and Moab are descendants of Lot. We know that when Sodom was destroyed, Lot, his wife, and his two daughters escaped. Unfortunately for Lot's wife, she turned around and looked, and she was not supposed to, and she turned into an Atziv Melech, a pillar of salt, and that was the end of her. Lot and his two daughters continued on to Sodom. They thought that the whole world had been destroyed, not just Sodom. And we all know the plan that Lot's two daughters had in order to restart the world again. They would get their father drunk and have relations with him, and in that way they would create new generations of human beings. So from that, Lot having relations with his daughters, two nations came out. One is Ammon and one is Moab. And those two nations, although they should have shown great gratitude to the Jewish people, Avraham Avinu saved Lot more than one time. He saved Lot from World War I, we call it, when the 5 kings and the 4 kings went to war. Lot was captured. Avraham saved him from captivity. And Avraham saved Lot when Sodom was being turned over and destroyed. B'schus Avraham, Lot was able to be saved. So there was much gratitude that was owed to Avraham Avinu by Lot and his descendants. There's a lot of gratitude that's owed by Ammon and Moab to the descendants of Avraham Avinu, but they not only didn't show gratitude to their quote-unquote cousins, they were actively involved in trying to destroy the Jewish people through many generations. We know the incident at the end of Parshas Balak with the Benos Moab. Moab was a sore point for the Jewish people many times in history. To go into one or two psukim about Ammon and Moab, this Perek in Yeshaya deals with Moab. In Parshas Kiseitze, which we'll be reading Bezrat Hashem in a few weeks, the Torah says that there are certain people that cannot convert to be Jews. Amongst those, the Torah says in Parshas Kiseitze, Perek Kof Gimel, Pasuk Dalet, Lo Yovo Ammoni uMoavi B'Kal Hashem. A descendant of Ammon and Moab cannot become a member of Klal Yisrael. They cannot convert. Gam Dor Asiri Lo Yovo Lehem B'Kal Hashem Ad Olam. Even a 10th generation descendant of Ammon and Moab cannot become a member of the Jewish people forever. Why? And the Torah says, Al Davar Asher Lekidmu Eshem Balechem Uvamayim B'Derech B'Tzeisam Mitzrayim. When you are leaving Mitzrayim, when you were on your path and road to Eretz Yisrael, they did not come out and bring you bread and water. They were relatives. You were traveling, a whole nation, and simply as Hakoras Hatoy, to show gratitude to the Jewish people for what Avraham Avinu did to their great-great-great-grandfather Lot. They should have had the decency to come out and bring us food and water, which they didn't. And because of that, their lack of gratitude, they can never become Jewish. And they Moab hired Bilam and paid him a world of money to try to curse the Jewish people out of existence. Baruch Hashem, that didn't happen. Hashem didn't listen to Bilam. But we have an extraordinary pasuk here. The pasuk says that Lo Yovo Ammoni u'Moavi b'Kal Hashem. No Ammoni or Moavi can ever convert to Judaism. And one of the reasons the Torah gives is they didn't have the basic gratitude to bring out bread and water to the Jewish people as you're leaving Mitzrayim, which means that it is such an important characteristic trait to have Hakoras Hatoy. It's such an important characteristic trait to show gratitude to someone who's done something good for you, that someone that lacks that character trait at all cannot even convert to Judaism. The Rebbeinu Shalom says these are not people that can convert to Judaism because innately they don't have the common decency to show gratitude to other people. That tells you that it is such a basic it is such a basic personality trait for a Yid to have Hakoras Hatoy, that a whole nation of Ammon and Moab, Machlokes, Rashi, Ramban, Ammon and Moab, but at any rate, it is such a basic principle here, personality trait, that Ammon and Moab showed a lack of gratitude and they didn't bring out food and water to us as we leave Mitzrayim, they can never convert to Judaism. Of course, we have the whole sugya, then how did Rus, who comes from Moab, how did she convert? And we have that whole sugya in the Gemara, the permanent ban on conversion for males. No male from Ammon and Moab can ever convert to Judaism. That's why it says Ammoni u'Moavi. And it's not a ban on female descendants of Ammon and Moab, and that's how Rus was able to convert. That is the very complicated sugya of Rus and how she converted. At any rate, Moab suffers for time immemorial from this problem of showing gratitude to others, specifically showing gratitude to the Jewish people. So now on page 122, with that introduction about Moab, 122 in the Art Scroll, we're in Perek Tesvav Pasuk Aleph. We'll read the Hebrew and then we'll go to the English. Masa Moab, ki belel shudad or Moab nidma, ki belel shudad ki Moab nidma. On the night Or of Moab was pillaged, Or was a famous city of Moab, it will be pillaged. It was silenced. On the night that Kir of Moab was pillaged, Kir is another city, it was silenced. In other words, these two great cities of Moab will be destroyed and silence will fall over the city. Pasuk Beis on page 22. Ola habayis v'divon habomos levechi al nevo v'al meid v'moav yiyelil b'chol rosha v'korcha kol zoken gedul. Back to the English. Its populace went up to the temple, and Divon went up to the high places to weep. Moab wails for Nevo and for Meidva. And all we'll stop there for a moment. It means that all the folks in Ammon and Moab, all the folks in Moab went to the top of their mountains to pray to their Avodah Zarah. They went into their temples to worship their Avodah Zarah in the hope that they would not be conquered. Who's the conqueror? So if you take a look at page 123 in your art scroll, note on Pasuk 1, it's no other than Sancheriv. Sancheriv, the Assyrian king, who destroyed the northern Jewish kingdom. And in destroying the northern Jewish kingdom, Moab helped out Sancheriv. Guess what? Sancheriv will eventually come, as prophesied by Yeshaya. Sancheriv is going to come and destroy Moab, who helped Sancheriv destroy the Jewish northern kingdom. So they're going to go up to their temples and pray to their gods, their Avodah Zarah, that Sancheriv should not conquer them. Their prayers will fall nowhere, and Sancheriv will conquer them. On all its heads there is baldness, every beard is diminished. When people get very nervous, there's a saying, I'm ready to rip my hair out of my head. I'm going to rip my hair out of my head. People talk that way when they get very upset, very nervous, very scared. They say they're going to rip their hair out of their heads. So the Navi here says that the people of Moab are going to be so scared and frightened of Sancheriv that they will all end up bald. On all of its heads there is baldness, every beard is diminished. Back to Pasuk Gimel, page 122. B'chutzosav chagu sok, al gagoiseh u'berchoseha kula yegel yered babechi. In their streets they have donned sackcloth. Upon their rooftops and in their plazas, everyone wails and laments with weeping. Back to page 122, Pasuk Dalet. Vatizak Cheshbon cried out, city in Moab. L'chora, it's no longer a city in Moab because it was conquered by Sichon. That's a question we won't deal with. They're still talking about Cheshbon being a city of Moab. And El Olei, El Olei is another city of Moab. Ad Yahatz Nishma Kolam, Al Kain Chalutzei Moab Yoriu Nafsho Yorelo. Their voice is heard until Yahatz. Therefore, the armed soldiers of Moab shout, its soul shouts for it. Even the army, the soldiers of Moab are going to cry out for help, and there'll be no one to help them. Now, this is a pasuk that tells you, the next pasuk tells you about the deep-seated good nature of Jewish people. Pasuk K, page 124. This is Yeshaya prophesizing. Libi leMoav Yizak. My heart cries out for Moab. Notwithstanding all the evil and the harsh things that Moab did to the Jewish people over centuries, Yeshaya is now prophesying about the complete downfall and destruction of a relative, Avraham Avinu's nephew Lot. Lot's descendants, Moab, are going to be destroyed. And the Navi says, Libi leMoav Yizak, my heart cries out for Moab. Vricher ad Zoar egla Shlishia, her refugees will flee until Zohar, the name of the city, the third-born calf. Third-born calf is a way that the Navi talks about something very good. The third calf born of a cow was usually a very strong calf. The first two calves were not necessarily strong. The third calf born of a cow was strong. So sometimes they talk about a strong city as the third born calf. For they will ascend, the lulith ascend with weeping. For the road of Horanim they howl with the cry of catastrophe. Let's take a look at the art scroll on page 125. Verse 5, Libi leMoav Yizak, my heart cries out for Moab. Unlike non-Jewish prophets, like Bilam, the prophets of Israel feel compassion even for their enemies. That's a Jewish prophet. That's a Jewish people. Binfol oyevach al tismach. That's a pasuk in Mishlei. Pasuk that Shmuel HaKatan many times said, Binfol oyev al tismach. When you see your enemy falling, don't have a big party. You say, Baruch Hashem, the Rebbeinu Shalom took care of my enemy. You don't have to break out champagne and drink over the fall of your enemy. The only time that Chazal made an exception to that, what we learned on Chol Hamoed Pesach during the Nefilas Haman party, is the Gemara says that Haman and Amalek are an exception to that rule, and with the fall of Amalek, there is a great party. And Purim is a day of the fall of Amalek Haman, and we make a great party. It's an exception to the general rule. Enemies fall, we don't rejoice with parties. If we go down to the bottom of the art scroll on page 125, left-hand column, Kimale haluchis b'vchiyale, for they will ascend the luchis, ascend with weeping. Not only is Yeshaya telling us this prophecy that he weeps for the destruction of Moab, he's telling them how to escape. He's prophesizing for Moab. I'm telling you where to escape to when Sancherib comes. There were three possible escape routes from Moab, by way of Luthith, Horonayim, and Zohar. Yeshaya advises them to go by way of Zohar because all the other routes will bring catastrophic results. So Yeshaya is not only telling them that Sancherib will come to destroy them, he's telling them that there are three different ways to get out of the place. And if you want to save yourselves, use the path to Zohar and go to Zohar where you can possibly be saved. Pasuk Vav on page 124, Ki me nimrim meshamos yiyu, ki yovesh chatzir, kola deshe yerek lo hoyim. Verse Zion, Al kain Yisra asa, ufukudasam al nachal ha'aravim yisa'um. Page 125, verse 7. For the wealth they had accrued and their possessions will be carried off to the Willow Brook. All the wealth and possessions and booty that Moab had taken from other nations in wars will flow into the water, will end up at a Willow Brook, and other nations will be able to recover the wealth and all the materials that were stolen by Moab during war. Verse 8, for the outcry envelops the boundary of Moab until Eglaim is her wailing, until Be'er Elim is her wailing. We take a look now. This is the idea I mentioned when we started the shir today. Moab does not understand what it means to show gratitude. And this is why they have their downfall. This is the big Aveira for which they're going to be destroyed, for their lack of gratitude to the Jewish people. So the art scroll explains, quoting Rashi, Radak, for the wealth, verse 7, for the wealth they had accrued will be carried off. I'm skipping a few lines. Rashi, however, explains that this retribution will befall Moab because of their persistent lack of gratitude. Instead of displaying appreciation to the Bnei Yisrael for the kindness and benevolence that Avram showed Lot, the ancestor of Moab, Moab aided Sancherib in his siege of Shomron and continuously taunted Yisrael through the years. So again, we have the same idea. It's in the Torah, it's now in Sefer Yeshaya. These people do not show gratitude. And we're not talking about a favor that the generation of Yeshaya did for the Moabites living then. We're talking about favors that Avraham Avinu did over 1,000 years, if not more. We're dealing here at the Churban Bayis Rishon. So we're in 3338, 2448. We're talking about over 1,000 years. The Torah and the Yeshaya are telling the Moabite people, over 1,000 years ago, Avraham Avinu, the progenitor of the Jewish people, did your great-great-great-great-grandfather Lot numerous favors. He saved him from Sodom. He saved him from the war between the 5 kings and the 4 kings. He took your ancestor in and protected him. That was over 1,000 years ago. And the Taina, the complaint against Moab, the Moab people, is over 1,000 years later, They lacked the gratitude to the Jewish people, tormented them, and even came to help Sanherib destroy the Jewish northern kingdom. In retribution for that, Sanherib himself is going to come and destroy the Moab people, even though the Moab people helped Sanherib destroy the northern Jewish kingdom. So the pasuk here again is pointing out the lack of gratitude is such a basic personality trait for not only a Jew, but for a human being, that lacking that personality trait, A, you can't convert to be a Jew. B, a destruction will befall the nation. Within the last couple of days, I found a sefer that was printed this year, just probably in the last couple of months. The name of the sefer is called Hakoros Hatoiv Kahalacha. Somebody actually wrote a sefer about the halachas of showing gratitude. So many of us think that showing gratitude is a good midah. It's a good characteristic trait. If you don't have that good characteristic trait, so you may be in a neutral zone. You're not a person that shows gratitude. Okay, but it doesn't make you a bad person by not showing gratitude. We get a completely different picture from what we learned. Male Moabites, Ammonites cannot convert because they lack the midah of gratitude. The destruction of Moab at the hands of Sanherib comes because of their lack of gratitude. So this lack of gratitude seems to be critical to not only Jewish people, but to humanity. So the Mechaber of the Sefer, Daniel Hyman, actually put together a Shulchan Aruch. And there's a lot of halachas. When is a person obligated to show Hakoros Hatov gratitude? Are there times where a person does not have to show Hakoros Hatov? But I noted, as I started learning the Sefer, in the introduction, the author quotes Rabbeinu Yerucham Mimir, Rabbeinu Yerucham Levovitz, who was the mashgiach in the Mir Yeshiva when it was in Europe. He wrote the following: Ki lo kasher anu choshvim ki inyan hakoros hatov o kafiyas hatov hu beged maila v'yisron hakasher. People think that showing gratitude is a good characteristic trait. It's just a nice thing to do. But lacking it is not the worst thing in the world. And certainly there's no Shulchan Aruch on gratitude. There's no Shulchan Aruch. It's just you either have the trait or you don't have the trait and you have to work on it. But how do you write a Shulchan Aruch on the halachas of showing gratitude? So Rabbi Yerucham, we're talking about in the early 1900s, Rabbi Yerucham wrote over a century ago, Ki im dinim yesh loyala. There are actual halachas of Hakoros Hatov. And a person that doesn't show gratitude to the other person who is owed the gratitude, there is a form of gezel, there's a form of stealing that the person that doesn't show gratitude is guilty of. It's a form of stealing. It's not just that you lack gratitude, it's a form of stealing. You owe the other, O-W-E. You owe the other person gratitude. If you don't pay what you owe, there's an element of gezel. You are stealing. Al pidin, not as a nice characteristic trait. Al pidin, the person who received good from another person must recognize the good and show his gratitude. Later in the Sefer, the Mechaber quotes Rav Moshe Feinstein. Yes, there's an expression, a debt of gratitude. Mr. Schiffman put that down at the bottom of the screen. A debt of gratitude, saying in America. What does a debt mean? A debt means it's something you owe. You have to pay a debt. So by not showing gratitude, the halacha says there's a gezela there. The author of the Sefer quotes Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Igris Moshe Yoredeya Chelik Beis, Siman Kuflamen. Rav Moshe says that Goyim have the same obligation as Hakoros HaToiv. Shahatam shegoyim chayom bakoros HaToiv mishum sheze nichlal b'chiv shel b'nei noach shlo lisnaig b'midas roi shem dvorim usam agunim. Even Goyim, in a general rubric for humanity, have a requirement not to be disgusting, not to be mo'us, not to be downgraded, not to be degraded kind of person. V'af b'nei noach musar maleim. Even b'nei noach are required, whether they are part of the 7 mitzvahs of the Noahide laws or not. There's a general commandment that a human being ought to act like a mensch, quote unquote. And not showing gratitude is a dover mo'us umaguna. It's disgusting. And therefore, even a goy is mechuyev to show hakoros hatoiv. So there you have a psak from Rav Moshe. We're talking about a halacha. The halacha is that a person is mechuyev to show hakoros hatoiv. A lack of hakoros hatoiv can be gezel. And now that we know that a goy is mechuyev in hakoros hatoiv, we understand that Moav, by failing terribly, we're not saying that all the goyim have hakoros hatoiv. We're not even saying all Jews have hakoros hatoiv. It's something that everybody needs to work on. But Moav had such a terrible attitude. Not only didn't they show hakoros hatoiv, they did the opposite. They went out and tormented Jews and helped Sancheriv conquer the northern kingdom. For that, they deserved destruction. So we go back to Sefer Yeshaya. And we're in Pasuk Ches, Pasuk 8. Ki yakifa haza oke eskavul Moav ad eglayim yilalasa uve'er elim yilalasa. For the outcry envelops the boundary of Moab until Eglayim is her wailing, until Be'er Elim is her wailing. The crying will be throughout the land of Moab as Sancheriv goes through the land and conquers Moab. Pasuk Tes, Ki me dimon molu dam, ki oshis al dimon no safot. Fleitas Moab, Aryeh L'Shevis Adama. Page 125, the English. For the waters of Dimon are filled with blood, for I will pour more of it into Dimon. And that's the end of today's Perek. The next Perek, which is Perek Tezayin, continues on the subject of Moab. Perek Yud Zayin is on page 130, Masa Damosek. It's the prophecy concerning Damascus, the prophecy concerning the fall of the king of Aram, who also tormented the Jewish people, as we learned in Sefer Malachim. And that's Perek Yud Zayin. And then when we come to Perek Yud Ches, we have Yeshaya's prophecy about the day of the war of Gog and Magog, and how the Jews will rise from that war, and the nations of the world will recognize that the Jewish people are the chosen people, and that Mashiach is the sovereign king over the world. He's God's sent sovereign king over the world. That begins in chapter 18. So we still have chapter 16 to do about Moab, chapter 17 to do about Aram, and then chapter 18 we come back to the Jewish people and the Milchama of Gog and Magog. And we'll stop here for today in Sefer Yeshaya. We'll pick up B'li Neder next week with Perek Tes Zayin.